Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at a way to create sort of a perspective motion effect using vMix merges and a couple of other scripting tricks to get this all to play together. And it's designed around a way that you can introduce a virtual panel, but with this sort of depth perception twist to it. But before we get to that, I want to invite everybody, please share any questions, comments in the section below, and we will try to get to them here live on the show. Also, if you'd like to join us on the show, we have a link in the show notes, and here on screen. So if you click on that, someone will be able to get you here on air, and we can have a face-to-face conversation. All right. So let's get started. Probably what I'd like to begin with is showing you exactly what I'm describing, what I'm going to be, describing how to do here during this show. So what I have here is basically a way that we can have, say, a virtual event we're running, and we want to introduce the panelists that are going to be part of this event. So the way I have this set up is that I can just select the panelist, and then everything slides down and I can introduce them. But then as I go through and select each new panelist, you can see this is sort of diving into the background, almost like it's going down an elevator shaft at a perspective. And each time a panelist slides off the main screen, you see them appear then in this lower screen where it comes up and you can see all of the previous panelists. And when you're finished with your introductions, then you can just go and say, put back the title, and it will then end with the title and the list of the panelists that you introduced. So it creates a slightly different model for how we would traditionally see this, which is either sort of a pure vertical move where everybody slides across, or even a horizontal, a horizontal move where everybody slides across, or a vertical move where everybody would move up and down, which is less common, but still something that is, very much a possibility for how you can do those types of intros. So I thought this just gave us a different tool to work with and potentially something you could use not just for virtual events, but maybe for sports or graduations or other types of, award ceremonies, things of that sort. So that's what we're going to be creating today. So before I get into the model that we're using, we do have a few comments here. So let's dive in and get to that. So Otis, thank you for joining. Otis, always good to see you here. So Tom Eagle, Tom, thank you for joining. Again, good to see you here. Oh, decriminalize nature. Oh, greetings back from New Jersey. Thanks for joining us here. Okay, so let me first set the framework of how we are working with this, and then we can go more into the vMix side and the scripting side for how we do all this. So the first is that we are taking 6 panelists in from LiveTair-Z, so that's sort of our source, which would be a very traditional model for how you would bring guest in or panelist into a virtual production. So that's how we're starting this. The way we have this set up, though, is that in order to create the motion, we're using the merge command, which will basically shift the same input the same layer. If it's the same input on the same layer, if you had that between 2 different inputs, it'll basically do a slow dynamic move from the way it's configured on input 1 to the way it's configured on input 2. And so that gives you that motion. And so what we've done is we've created basically 2 different inputs that have these different positionings. So one has sort of the previous, the guest that's going to come next, the live guest, and the guest that we just had previously. And so it's sort of that stack. The next one, the live one, and the previous one. And so all we do when we sort of shift between these is we take in input 1 and we have them sort of above the screen, slid off the screen, and then the live one in the middle of the screen. And then the second one, which is the one we're going to move to, sort of puts the next guest into the middle of the screen and the current guest that's live off the bottom of the screen. So that when you do the merge between them, what ends up happening is that live guest slides down off the screen and that next guest slides into the live position. And that's the basic way we create that motion. And by the way we have the inputs set up, we are now turning around and saying we can sort of create that perspective and that depth and that size all through the way we configure the layers on each of those inputs. And that's how we do that when we create that merge between the 2. The other thing that we do to sort of simplify this is we use 3 mixes in addition to the main mix for sending out the feed. And those 3 mixes are used to say what's in that next guest, what's in the live guest, and what's in that previous guest. And so that's basically what the 3 mixes do. And those are the layers. We put those mixes in layers on the 2 inputs, and that's how we do those motion, just by moving where those mixes appear on screen. So that's the general arc of how this all works. But let's take a closer look at the vMix side of this, and we can get started here. Excuse me. So if we look at the vMix, first we have this background, which is just sort of this moving background. And we put that in there because we think that motion down with these slight, if you sort of look here, you can see these elements that sort of just drift downward. That creates that sense of perspective depth. And we have this angled at the same sort of positioning that we're using for all of the guest boxes, the 3 mixes that are going to hold the guests that we have. And so that makes it fit in nicely with the overall look. We then have our 6 LiveTair-Z inputs that are coming in here. And those are the panelists that we have for this. And then, as I mentioned, we have 3 mix inputs that we use. One is for that that next, which I call the Q input, which is mix 2. Then I have the live input, which is mix 3. And then I have the done input, the guess that we already had, and that's mix 4. And those are the ways, that's the way we set everything up for sort of managing which participant, which panelist will go into which slot when we want to create the motion around that. And then, as I said, the merge has to take place between two inputs. So I have one called set 1 and one called set 2. And if we look at these two, if I go to the layers, you can see in the background, I have that neon lines. That was that background thing that we had in the beginning. That's just those lines falling down in the background. And then I have my 3 mixes here, the cue, the live, and the done. And what sets these apart is where I have these things positioned. So at the top, which is sort of the done, I have it almost full size because it's sort of coming in almost off the edge of the screen. And it then is basically, you know, all positioned all the way up the screen. But if I go to the next mix, what we're doing is now we shrunk it down to just above half size, and we have it now sort of panned further down. So now we're sort of sliding it down the screen. But the other thing here that makes this work is that we take the x-axis, which if you look at this as a plane, and we are sort of drawing this plane here, I tilt the basically a little backwards to create that sense of depth in this. So that's sort of creating this, you know, the bottom swings to the inside and the top stays on the outside here. So that's the bottom sort of tilted in and the top tilted out. And that aligns exactly with the same way I did. So if we just go back to the background here, you can see the background, the next layer, they all have the same tilt to them. So what we are doing is we're actually then moving in 2 directions. The first one is that as we slide down, we are taking and moving in sort of these vertical directions. So it moves from 2, which pushes it all the way off the top, and it moves it down the screen to just above the halfway mark in the screen. And it also shrinks it. It goes from 0.9, and then when we go to the next one, which is there, it goes to 0.6, which is now smaller. So you can see as it does this transition, not only is it moving down, but it's also shrinking in. And because of the perspective and the tilt that we have, we now get that sense that this is just sliding back into a tunnel in the screen and going down. And finally, you can see when we get to the end, it's even smaller still and completely off the screen. So again, you get that continuum of motion. So the only thing now that matters, because if I look at these two and the way they're set up, is really I'm moving things between these different screens. So if we go back to the layers, you can see in my set 1, I have the cue, the live, and the done mixes set up as layers 3, 4, and 5. But if I now jump over and go to set 2, so we just do that here. In set 2 now, you can see that I've moved the cue into layer 4 and the live into layer 5. And so all that means is that I am taking that cue, which was in layer 3, and it's shifting down the screen, and it's going to take on the attributes of whatever was in layer 4, which was the live one, which is sort of 0.65 and sort of shrunken down a bit and moved down. And then the live is going to slide to whatever the positioning was in layer 5 here, which was off the screen. So now we have this sense of the perspectives created by the positioning in the layers, and the motion is created by what I assign to those layers from set 1 to set 2. And when I do that merge, that motion happens. So that's basically how that perspective motion is created. But now let's look a little bit more at what we do across the bottom of the screen, where you can see we have all these guests that appear across the bottom. So the way we have that set up is we create this composite, which is really these layers put here together. And so because I wanted to create some separation from this perspective view on the background of the main screen on this overlay that we're compositing here, the way I do this is I create its own background, sort of nicely color blended, so they sort of match color-wise. And then what I do is I have a whole set of layers that are called the panelist layers that I can then assign each when the panelist slides down off the screen. I can then say, assign this panelist to one of these layers and turn that layer on. And that's exactly how this works. So if I go to this panelist layer here, you can see that I have all of these layers appearing here. And if I just wanted to turn a layer off, you can see that's just going to make the different layers disappear. So I can just pop the panelist on, or take them off, however I want to handle that. And that's what's done on this layer. If I go over to the panel slots, that's basically just this banding across the bottom, which creates a place where I can visually separate these panelists as they appear across this bottom segment from any background. And this just gets composited together into this panelist overlay here, which is really just these three things: the background, the slots, and then the panelist on top of that. And all of that together is how we create this bottom bar that you see here. So these are almost like two separate segments. One is everything that's going in the larger screen with the big drop down the tunnel, and the other is populating these panelists across this bottom overlay. And then we also have a title card, because one of the things that I mentioned, when I get to the end and I'm finished, so let me sort of reset this. If I just wanted to start to pop panelist on here, and I put these on and say, for this panel, I only had two, I can turn around and say, well, now let me put up this title card, and it will treat this differently and say, those are the two panelists for this panel that we're having here. So we have an easy way to do that. And that panel title card allows me to sort of have a good start point and a good end point in this. And again, if you think about this in the broader context, this could be anything from, a banner for a team, for the teams that are competing with different players, whatever you want. You can actually just sort of substitute what would make sense and use this in a lot of different possible frameworks. So this just gives you sort of the overview of what we did on the vMix side. So before, though, we jump to the scripting, which is sort of the engine behind how all this stuff operates. Let me see if we have any more comments here. So we have James. Thank you, James. I always appreciate you joining us here live. Good to see you. And William, thank you. And again, it's great to see it. I love the fact that we have so many people who keep coming back for the live shows. It's great here. Okay, so now let's jump into sort of the real meat behind how all of this works. And I'm going to start first in vMix to show you the way we have some shortcuts set, and then we'll jump specifically into the script to go through how all of this works here. So in the shortcuts, basically, if you get the A1 up there, that's just a test one we did. What I have are 6 main buttons which set dynamic value. And all this is doing is saying which input do I want to display next? Which panelist input do I want to display? And so if you look at this and we set this up, this is saying I'm setting dynamic value 1 to LTAZ1, which is the name of the input in our vMix preset that will be the first panelist that we have. And we're using this to tell the script, this is the next panelist that I want to show. And so we do that for sort of panelist 1 to panelist 6. We also have one to say we want to show the title card. And so that's the one we have here. And then we have the two scripts that we're going to be diving into. The next script basically is the one that handles everything you see on screen, from setting the uh, right inputs in the set 1 and set 2 to do the merge, as well as populating everything across the bottom for all the guests that are forming the panel. And then we have reset, which is basically a way to get everything back to scratch and reset all the variables. So it's really our start point that we will go with. So let's switch over from here and go over to our first script, which is the next script, which is called Angle Scroller here. So if we switch over to this, we'll just go through this fairly quickly, and we can dig in more detail if people have questions. But the whole first part is really setting up all the definitions. So as I said, we have the two inputs that we do the merge between, set 1 and set 2, sets identifying their titles here. We have the cues, and these are the mixes that are associated with the cues with the mixes for the cue, the live, and the done mixes, which are the people we have sort of set up. Then we have the title card input. And we also have to, because mixes can only provide an input number, they can't provide the title of the input inside of a mix, at least through the scripting, the direct scripting. Then what we're doing is we are just creating a place where we could store the input number that's stored for the title as well, if we have to use that. And so then we've talked about, we have the ability with the dynamic values to set what we want our next presenter to be, our next panelist to be, sort of the next input we're going to do. And that's where we're going to read that from dynamic value 1, and we're going to put that into the next input title so we know how to access it. And then this is for the way we have everything set up. This is the input that we're assigning to the cue, to the current to the current cue mix, the current live mix, and the current done mix. So those are sort of the three. And this is just saying what input are we assigning to each. So if we want to do the moves between the two different set 1 and set 2 inputs, this is how we control what goes into each one of those mixes. So then when we shift between them, everything has that dynamic flow to it. And then this is everything for remember I talked about the panelists, where you can turn on the little slots for each of the panelists after they slide off the screen, and you populate that panelist bar across the bottom. This is turning around and saying, what's the title of that input that houses that? And then this gives us which is the last one of those layers that we're using inside of that input, so we know where to put the next, where the last one was placed and where the next one would go. So that's basically how we have everything set up here. And that's really just all our preface work for this. And then we go in again, load the vMix XML, because we're going to be reading stuff from the vMix state. And so the first thing we're doing is getting the dynamic value. What's the panelist input that we want to display next? And we're also just getting the input of the title card. And we're also getting the basically the input numbers of the cue, live, and done mixes. So we have all of those, and we can work with all of those. And so we're also then determining what's the next overlay node that we can use. So this is basically which slot am I up to in that overlay with the guest, so I know where to place it. And basically, because we're sort of working off of a node tree to get this, we are just pulling this out. And we need it because this is one of those funky things with vMix. Some things in the script are going to be 1 index, some things are 0 index. In this case, this is 0 index, which means when you want to reference the first item, you're basically saying use 0 instead of 1. And then because we're going to have to increase it by 1, and we're going to use it in something that requires sort of a standard index, a 1 index space, we actually have to take whatever's in here and add 2 to it. Basically, that's just the math to get this done. So that's all this is doing, but it's saying what's the next overlay we're going to be writing this into. And so we have that all set up. And then we actually get started to place things into the different mixes to get going. So for the first mix, we are taking saying in whatever is in the Q mix, the one that's off screen, ready to come on screen, that goes our next input title. And then for whatever is in the current live, that's we are turning around and saying this, we want to move that to the done mix. So we can sort of say, now I know what's coming in and I know what's going out. So what to push the one that's live out, I have to assign that to the done mix because that's how I'm going to slide it down. So this is basically just getting everything set for what we talked about. Then we actually go and we do the merge. And we merge because set 1 is displayed. So we are taking set 2. We're doing the merge. And we're doing that over 1.5 seconds. And you can, because I know I've been asked this multiple times, sort of offline from the show. How do you change the speed of a transition? There is a value you can add to your API call called duration, which you can then assign the number of milliseconds you want a transition to take place on. And that's what we're doing here with the merge. So that creates a nice 1.5 seconds scroll down the screen as this thing sort of slides. So it creates some visual dynamic. We then, because the merge takes time, we then have to wait a certain amount of time. And then as that one is just like we have like 300 milliseconds, less than half a second left for the slide to happen, that's when we go in and we start to display the next panelist across the bottom of the screen. So it sort of almost feels like they slide off the main screen and then come back up into that overlay screen. And that's what we're doing in this next piece of the script. So we take and make sure if the current live is not the title input, and which is basically saying we'll never put the title back into that bar because that's something that's just used as a title screen. It's not one of the panelists. And the other, we set a limit to say the number of inputs that we have. We have 6 guests plus the title. So if the next overlay index is not less than 8, which means it's sort of outside of our range of inputs that we are dealing with, as long as it's good, then we can go in and we can set the layers that we want to do for the sidebar. So this is turning around saying, what guest, what panelist are we putting in the next available open slot in our overlay of panelist? And then we just turn that layer on. So that's basically making them switch on. We could do something fancier. There are different ways to sort of do transitions in and other things, but we just thought this was a good basic way to cover this. And then with that done, we wait half a second just to let everything settle because scripting, it all sort of works asynchronously. So if we don't give things time, you could end up having things step on each other. So this lets that whole thing appear. And then what we're doing is we're getting ready to sort of reset for the next guest. And the way we have to do this is because when we do the transition, we take and we have set 1 in our program out and set 2 in preview, and we do that merge between them. What ends up happening is set 2 ends up getting into program and set 1 gets into preview. Because we don't want to get code to become too complicated, we can actually just go and say, what if I just make set 1 look just like set 2 visually on screen and just do a cut back. So now I can say, now set 1 is displayed on screen and set 2 is what I work on when the next guest comes in. So it's basically sort of a little housekeeping, but it simplifies the scripting a lot for what we have to do. So what we do here then is we turn around and say, let's take and we're going to inside the live mix, which is the only one that's on screen at this time. Now that everything's settled, we know that whatever is displayed in the live mix, that's the only thing that's on screen. So we're going to make sure that we have that live mix set to the next input title, because right now, that's all we've done. We took what was in next and we slid that down. So now we're turning around and saying what was in live, we now have to make sure it is that next input that we just made as our live input in this merge transition. So we set that in to the live. We sleep a moment to make sure that gets in, and then we cut set input 1 back to the input title. So now everything's good because the one on input 1 showing on screen is the live mix 3. So that's the one that's shown on screen. Now we have that set. And so everything that we do now means that our program out is set 1, input set 1, and our preview is input set 2. And now we can manipulate input set 2 like we did on the rest of the script. And it simplifies everything. Now, the next time I go, all the code is the same. I don't have to remember which one am I changing and which one am I merging. Gets rid of all of that with a very simple little fix at the bottom of the script. So that's basically everything we have in this script. And the reset script, not really going to spend a lot of time. This is just pretty much all the same things we set up here. And then we just initialize everything here. We set everybody to the input title card to get started. We set the set 1 as our output on program. So gets all of that set. And we clear all of the layers inside of our overlay, the panelist segment of the overlay. So we set them all to none. So they're all cleared. So very, very simple. Just a quick, simple way we have to get started with this. And then, you can drive all of these things out of different types of data sets or whatever if you want to make it work for you. But that's basically how we've done everything here. So hopefully you found this interesting and useful. We will have all of the files that we did here up shortly in the link in our show notes for all the show assets, and you'll be able to take and play with this yourself. All right, so that's it for today's show. And hopefully you found the concept in general interesting, and we can dig into more detail if you have any questions in the post-show. But I just basically want to say thank you, everybody. I know we haven't been doing the shows as often. We're going to try to get it to every other week, but I can't promise that yet, given everything we have going on. But we're definitely trying to not let it go beyond the third week. So we will be doing another show in 2 or 3 weeks. If you can't hang around for the post show, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us live here and for watching this. And if you can, I'll see you in a few. If not, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. So I was coming at this from sort of an interesting perspective. I was looking at all the different ways, because we've done a lot of shows where we sort of have people slide across in different carousels and different things where they bump out when you introduce them and other things like that. And I was trying to think of something that could work well without any type of sort of limit on screen, so there was a sense of things moving on and off screen. But I didn't want to do something which was sort of just flat 2D. And that's where I started to say, what can you really do with, in the vMix, that rotational element, which has been in vMix for a while. And it's just not something that a lot of people do. They may just rotate something at an angle that way if they wanted to, but not too much sort of in depth with the X, rotating around the X axis, which is that center axis running this way. So when you do that sort of rotation, I thought that was an interesting way to present that. And then I realized between creating that rotation and scaling, you could actually create that depth perspective. And once I had that, that was sort of like the thing that connected it. Now I said, okay, how do we make something work here that would be basically a different model than I've seen in the past for introducing panelists, introducing team players, introducing people in award ceremonies, any types of things. So there are a lot of general use cases that I think could apply here, but definitely something that I thought could be flexible and applied in different ways. And from there, I was thinking, okay, but if people go off the screen, you don't get a sense of the way a real, like, so if you think live, the way people would introduce a panelist, you'd have somebody come in off onto the stage, and then they'd probably go over and take a seat as one of the panelists. And then the host would introduce the next panelist, and they would move over and take a seat as the following one was introduced. So that was where the thought for the overlay across the bottom came. So I wanted to keep that sort of flat, so that was sort of more 2D, but that was really the concept of filling in the seats. So each time you introduce somebody, they're sort of up there as they're walking in, they're appearing for the first time, and then they go and sort of take their seat, and the next panelist can be introduced. And that was sort of the concept with that. And when you combine the two, it just made it really a really easy way to sort of fill out the full picture of an introduction with people taking their seats, and then you could start the panel any way you wanted to. So that was great. James, thank you. I appreciate that. We're always trying for different things here that we think are useful, but not the same old, because we know there are a lot of different, standard sort of templated ways that people do things, and we're always trying to put a different spin on that. So I appreciate that feedback. There's a lot of people that work on the show, and I get a lot of help from technical folks on, thoughts around different ways to, optimize what we do. So, always good feedback for everybody that's involved as well. Thanks, James. So, so that was really where all this came from. There are a lot more things that can be done to make this more sophisticated. For instance, we didn't take any of the metadata. So LiveTZ would give us like the names of all the guests. And we could have done all that and sort of done all those assignments. It just added more complexity to the script, but it didn't really show a lot more in terms of new technique or approach. So we didn't want to put it in here, but if this were something that we were doing for an actual production, we probably would have added all of that as well, where we're turning on and sort of putting the name of the new panelists that are coming in and keeping little name logos under, names under. We were also thinking you could put things like logos if they're from companies. You could, put a little logo next to them or sort of a corner overlay. So different things that you could do to enhance and personalize the specifics here. But we thought that this sort of covered everything that we wanted to cover. So if you have any questions, just get them up now so I can get them before we're done. But this is something that we're going to keep trying to find sort of these niche things that we can cover in a way that is interesting to everybody and can work. We're looking as we sort of come closer to the end of the year. It's scary, but we're sort of almost halfway through October now. So the end of the year is quickly approaching. So we are starting to think of where we want to go next with the show and how we want to do this. And so because there's more stuff that we want to do, and I know I haven't been able to do it as frequently live as we want, what we're thinking of doing is trying to create more pre-recorded shows that are going to be more focused. And then, so we'll try to do like a weekly pre-recorded show. And then once a month, we'll do a live show where we'll introduce some sort of generalized concept that we were hinting at with the pre-recorded shows, and then go in and answer any questions. So as we're thinking, this is sort of where our head is at right now for how we like to do this, so we can stay in contact on a more frequent basis, still keep the live component as an important piece, because I think this community that we have is something I really value. And, hopefully being live gives everybody here, an additional point of access so we can get questions and thoughts and different show ideas, all those things out on the table. So that's where we're headed right now. And I will talk more about this as we sort of flesh out what we want to do, sort of template the workflow of these pre-recorded shows. But that's where we're headed to right now. So with that being said, and since I don't think we have any additional questions, why don't we call this a wrap for this time? And I want to very sincerely thank everybody. It's great having you join us live, and especially hanging around for the post show. And we will be doing a show again in 2 or 3 weeks. We'll let you know as we get closer. So until then, be safe, be well. Take care.